Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to the Fierce Factor podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Lindholm, and you are tuning into a very special Fierce Factor Encore episode. I've pulled out a few of my very favorite interviews with fierce women in aesthetics who create, inspire, and disrupt the status quo. I hope you enjoy this powerful discussion as much as I did. Without further ado, here's your power-packed episode spotlighting fierce women in aesthetics. Hi there, welcome to the Fierce Factor podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Lindholm. And I think it's time for us women to shift the conversation in business and step into our feminine leadership to do the most iconic work the aesthetic industry has ever seen. Each week, I'll be bringing a powerful dose of strategy, sarcasm, solutions, and sass that will rev up your creativity and ignite your brilliance as you link arms with me along our shared path of personal and professional growth in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Let me tell you, today's guest is someone that has been on my radar for an interview for a long while. You are going to love this episode with Dr. Tiphany Hall as she opens up about her childhood, being a single mom, a college professor, and now leading organizations from conception to thriving. Tiphany serves as the Chief Growth Officer at Aesthetic Record, an all-in-one EMR and practice management solution that powers over 3,000 U.S. clinics and serves more than 1.5 million patients in the aesthetic industry. Tiphany's work with Aesthetic Record inspired her to be named as a 2020 Top 25 Woman Leader in Healthcare Technology by Healthcare Technology Report and one of the 10 Next-Gen Leaders in 2020 by Mirror Review Magazine. Tiphany also serves as the co-director of Aesthetic Next, a multi-disciplinary international meeting for injectors, practice managers, and staff focused on growing practice potential through advanced injector and business training. And prior to her work with Aesthetic Record and Aesthetic Next, Tiphany spent 4 years with Galderma, where she led education, including professional relations, hands-on training, and practice development. Tiphany holds an MBA and a PhD in organizational development, and you may see her on stage as she frequently lectures throughout the U.S. on practice operations, technology-enabled solutions, and human capital optimization in healthcare. We are privileged to have her joining us today for a raw insight experience to the setbacks and really nuances that shape Tiphany's role in life and business. I'm so excited for you guys to tune into this. So without further ado, here's episode 55 with Dr. Tiphany Hall.
Tiphany, I want to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you and just to pick your brain and really share with the aesthetic world who you are and this beautiful woman that is behind the powerhouse companies that you run. So thanks for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. And it's funny that you say that because I've looked at you and thought the same thing. Like, how can you be a consultant, be good at all these things, be so happy and so pretty? I listen to your podcast all the time. You've had some incredible guests on. So I think it's a bucket list for me to get to be here with you today. So thanks for having me.
Girl crushes. I love it. Yeah. So this is so fun. So you are the Chief Revenue Officer for Aesthetic Record, which, you know, it's funny. I've been in this industry for a long time. And as of like the last year or so, all of a sudden, the majority of my clients are using Aesthetic Record. And we're like AR. We just talk about AR, you know, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. Learning more about the program and then the Aesthetic Next and all the things. And I really want to know a little bit about you and who you are. Tell us about you and all the things you do and really who you are in your own words.
You know, it's crazy. I'm addicted to work, which I know is a really bad thing to do. So I thrive on like producing things, you know, like accomplishing something on a task list. So I, as a person, just work all the time. Even as a mom, I overextend. I do too much. I take a little idea and make it really, really big. And then it's over the top. So I'm like an anxiety stress bucket 24/7. That's who I am at my core, is just anxious and stressed out. No, but the thing that I love most about probably my entire life is just to make things better. You know, whether that's a company better, a person's life better, you know, friends, whatever that may be. I've always had a goal that if I can make something a little bit better, more efficient, faster, easier, smarter, whatever that is, that's kind of my contribution. So whether it's as a friend, as a mom, as a boss, my goal is to always make something incrementally better for someone. So it's kind of my leading heart with all the things that I do. And I think if you think about AR as an example with our software, the whole idea is to make a practice's life easier. With our conference, to make learning new things easier, or to get smarter faster. So I think all the things I do really center on that. And, now I'm a mother raising a 7-year-old boy. As we're having this podcast, he's home from quarantine because the kid in his class has COVID. So having to adapt, like teaching a child and working with him while he's on Zoom. And I'm also on Zoom doing things. And it's a kind of a chaotic world. So as a person, I'm overly stretched and doing lots of fun things, but it's what I thrive on. Well, I'm awake about 22 hours a day. I sleep about 2 to 3 hours a night. I'm not a big sleeper. I like to work a lot. And so, me at the core of who I am, it's just, I'm hard-nosed, hard-charging, hustle all the time kind of person. People don't like that answer. They think that you can do it all. You can have it all with an 8 to 5 and you can be all the things. Listen, sister, it's not reality. If you're not willing to put in the work and miss a meal and miss a soccer practice and miss a recital and do the things you have to do to make it, you're not going to make it. So as a person, I'm kind of the mindset that whatever it takes to get it done, I will go to the end of the earth and back if it means that we can accomplish the goal and, move forward. So my child suffers from time to time, as do my employees, as I have to give and take things. But as a person, my goal is just to do whatever I can to make everything around me just a little bit better.
Well, I have mad respect for that. But I have to get at least 8 hours of sleep. In fact, yesterday I was talking to a client and I'm like, I think I overslept. I maybe had 10 hours. I love, love, love sleep. So, but do you feel rested when you get up?
Well, it's interesting. People ask me about this. I have narcolepsy, which is a really misunderstood disease or diagnosis. With narcolepsy, you can also never sleep. So it goes either way. You're either hypersomnic or you're insomniac. It's kind of a weird thing. And so for me, my narcolepsy allows me to really function without sleep for long periods of time. So I'll go 3 days with no sleep. And then on day 4, I'm a monster. So usually on Wednesday, I have to sleep for a few hours, a good 5 hours. And I'm good again, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's like this cycle of every 3 days, I'm out of my mind, but I can do it. And it's really crazy. My adrenaline is always spiked so high. I'm always ready to go fight or flight mode 24/7, which I think is why I'm a good task person, because I'm ready to jump in and tackle it any moment in the day, because I'm so used to having no sleep. My body's constantly in this primitive warrior mode, but it's worked out quite well for me professionally. So I don't hate it, but yes, I'm sure if I slept more and had better skin, better hair, I'd probably weigh less,
Well, I don't know if that's even possible. You're so, I actually saw a study yesterday about that. You can actually live with high stress, but if you believe that stress is contributing to your health, that it's not actually going to impact you negatively. So it's really about your perception about your stress. So I'm going with that one. I also go with the one that when they say people who drink wine tend to do better in business. So yeah, I'm going with that one too.
I think the wine is great. But the interesting thing about not sleeping is you can't drink wine. So I can't drink wine ever at home, not one drink, because I'll fall asleep and then I'm asleep for 6 hours. So the alcohol content I consume is very minimal, very, very minimal, which in my younger years was not the case. Luckily, in my late 30s, almost 40s, that's now the case. So that's probably been good for my health, is not drinking so much wine.
Yeah, oh, of course. So you have a really interesting background that I think it would be cool to share. Attached to the end of your name, you have an MBA and a PhD. You run a business, but you have also really strong clinical acumen. So tell us a little bit about this dynamic brilliance that you have as well. I think people would be interested to know about you.
Well, I think the key to anyone's success is learning agility. I have very high learning agility, so I can learn anything quickly, and I have a very photographic memory. And so 2 things that have served me really, really well in my life. But I started in chemical engineering in grad school, in college. I wanted to be a chemical engineer and do science, go to law school, the whole thing. That somehow transformed into business, and I ended up getting a business degree. And I worked in international trade for a long time. Worked with China, doing some things there. I worked with the Arkansas World Trade Center, and was really going to focus on this business thing. I wanted to do trade to make things better for countries who needed our help. And that led me to becoming a professor in a college. And I thought, to become a professor as an MBA is not a good idea. You need to become a PhD. Without a PhD as a professor, not a good choice. You make no money, you work like a dog, and you get none of the perks. And so I started my PhD right after my MBA was finished. And I did it, it took a long time. I had a baby, I got married, things happened. But once I finished it, it was wonderful to be done with it. actually defended my PhD at Galderma during a work day. I had to go into a conference room and do a virtual thing with my professor and my whole chair group to get that finished. Because again, no time to stop, right? No time to stop. And in the meantime of the PhD happening, I worked for Alcon, did some pharmaceutical things. I've worked for Dillard's and consulting, doing large scale operations. I've worked for Walmart as a vendor, doing some training things, different dynamic HR things. So over the course of my life, I've done a lot of really random stuff. But I will tell you, Kaylee, I attribute a lot of my success to really two things. I grew up with an entrepreneur father who lived to work, still does. At almost 70, he lives to work every day. And I was doing payroll as an 8-year-old kid, helping hire and fire and doing things in the business. And then I worked fresh out of college at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. Here's your plug, ERAC. You go through management boot camp and you learn how to be just a fantastic manager. You go through crazy crisis and turmoil and you learn to lead through anything in enterprise. And so that taking that $30,000 a year job in a blazing heat in South Florida washing cars was the best thing I've ever done for my career. And so from that point forward, it was just, the next job was the next cool thing to do. I just kept building on a career of, I love training. Let's go train at Walmart, the biggest company in the world. Oh, let's go train at a pharmaceutical company now. Let's go sell aesthetics. And so I've owned some CrossFit gyms along the way. I've done some things there. And each experience was building on something that I loved from the prior experience. And so it's a very weird resume to your point. It makes no sense to anyone how you go from the beauty counter at Dillard's to now running a software company. But something about each job was a really cool thing that kind of led me to the next cool opportunity. So when I go for an interview, they're like, what is this thing that you're giving me? Your life makes no sense to anyone. But then when I tell the story about how it all kinds of, kind of came together, it's oh, okay. You just like to learn.
Let me sum it up for everyone here. So what I'm hearing is if you sleep 2 hours a day, you basically get to live 3 lives.
That's what I kind of feel like. But the clinical...
You were a college professor. What did you teach?
I taught HR and supervision. I taught finance classes, which my actual degree is in banking and finance. I taught really anything around computer software. So ironically, 10 years ago, I taught computer software and some light programming out of college. And now I'm obviously running a technology company. So I've run another company or worked with a company building apps before this one. So this is my second software development company and that 3 lives in one thing. So I've done, some interesting stuff, but I feel like it all kind of, again, comes together. And the clinical part of it is I wanted to do education. And as a sales rep in Arkansas for Galderma, I didn't have a nurse resource to help me. And I had practices who had to know what to do. And so basically for me, I had to learn enough clinical to be able to talk to them and get by. And then from there, started leading this training group at Galderma. And then now obviously with Aesthetic Next, that I have no choice. If I'm going to consult with a faculty member to be on stage on a podium, I've got to be able to prep them, speak their language, know what they're going to face if they have an adverse event on stage, if they have an occlusion. I've got to be the person to know how to anticipate that problem, or I can't give the solution and have it ready to go in case it actually comes to fruition. So I feel like if you know all the things that could go wrong, I'm kind of a doomsayer. If I know all the things that could go wrong, I can kind of control what is going right in that moment. Right. And so I really had no choice.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. It's almost like that you triage, you're an ER nurse or something I
say I should have gone to medical school. I say this every day. Why didn't I go to medical school?
I'm seeing you. I'm envisioning you running around that patient's coding, fix that, do that. You do that, delegating yeah. All right, go team. I love it. I mean, what's interesting is I found as I've been going through this process with this podcast of doing pre-interviews and interviewing people and just been so lucky to meet really interesting people. One thing that continually comes up, and that's it's one of the tenets that I think really drives what the Fierce Factor is all about. And that's that success is great. I think we like to look at people we look at you, we're oh, it's Tiphany Hall. Oh my gosh, she's amazing. She must have just fallen out of bed like that. And clearly you've worked very hard for the things that you've accomplished. But one thing that as a theme, many women will say, I learned this, or I had to tap into a certain level of resilience because I faced this challenge in my life, or there was something that really happened that it was sort of the climb back from the adversity. Do you feel that there have been challenges that you've made lemonade out of lemons? Is there something that you would attribute your success to that you've had to sort of work through?
Oh, I've got a very long list. I think back to the whole point about being a kid, I grew up in a house that worked. Everything revolved around work. We didn't go to Disney World. Never been to Disney World in my life. Even as a 38-year-old woman, I've never been in my life. We didn't have those kinds of things. We lived to work. And so I learned from day one that no matter what you want to do in your life, what you think is fun and exciting, until the job is done, you don't do it. So I grew up with that mentality. When my dad walked in the front door of our house, you better be working, cleaning, cooking, sewing, something, because if he was at work, you're at work. And so from the time I was 3 years old, that's just the way it had always been. And there was also an idea that if it wasn't excellence, it wasn't allowed. And so I never had the chance to not be excellent at something at home, because my dad expected, as did my mom, that if he's out working, so should we. So I think from a resilience perspective, it's all I've ever known how to do is just to work and be really, really good at something. But I switched schools a lot as a kid. I lived far away in the middle of nowhere. And so I had to switch schools and different things. And so I think I learned to be a chameleon early. And I think for people who are looking at what can you do to be successful, become a chameleon. I can mimic your behavior. I can fit into your room, because I used to have to do that as a kid to fit into schools. Like you become what they want you to be in that moment to get what you want. And then you go to the next place and you have to do a whole different version of yourself. And so I think you learn this like adaptive personality until you can kind of get back to who you really are. So I think going to a lot of schools as a kid was very helpful for me to kind of learn that resilience part of it. But then my mom passed away when I was very young. I was 22-ish, 23. And so I've had no mother for almost half my life. And my sister is amazing, but that's a very hard thing for a young girl to go through. I've had no guidance as far as like a motherly figure. I've never had one since. I didn't have like a big network of people in my life to kind of take over and like guide me and grow me up, if you want to use that word. And so I've kind of learned to navigate on my own. I made a lot of bad choices as a young girl, a lot of bad choices. And so I think about it I've dug out of that. I dug out of a really big hole that I created when I was in my early 20s, because I just had no choice. Like I knew I didn't want to be poor. I didn't want to have kids and be poor. I wanted to have a house, have the things that my parents had, and hopefully do better in my life than they did. And so I didn't think there was ever a chance I couldn't make it. Like there was never a reality in my mind that said, you won't get there. It was just a matter of how. Like how hard do you have to work? What do you have to do? How hard do you have to push to get there? And so some days I'll look around and think, my gosh, like this is really my life. Because I know when I was 23, I was like $5 away from being like out of a home or out of food. And I had no one to call because my dad thought that I was doing great. And I couldn't call home and say, by the way, I have no money. I can't even buy a plane ticket to come home. And then of course, my mom, a lot of things were happening in my home life. I couldn't put that on them. So it was a very challenging young part of my career. But from there, I came home, I found grad school. I was really good at grad school. I, straight A student my whole life. And so it was like, I was good at something again. And I felt that like fire of like, oh my gosh, I'm actually worthy of this. And then it just kind of took off from there. But from birth to about 25 was a hard go for me, Kaylee, a very hard go from time to time.
It's funny that I'm hearing a lot of similarities to my childhood too. My dad had his own business, same thing, work ethic. Like he was very not a privileged child. His mom left him and he was raised and literally didn't have a bed, slept on the floor, like had nothing, and worked his way to getting the first master's degree in his family and becoming a professional football player. And his whole philosophy around how to find success in life was you work for it and you can achieve anything if you work hard. But it's funny you mentioned that, like you had to work at home. I remember coming home from school and I was the oldest of the siblings. And it was like, I had to like manage the shifts of cleaning and organizing, and the house needed to be spotless. And it was crazy. I think on Saturday mornings, my dad would run the vacuum up to my head, like, oh, it's 7 a.m., get up, And I think like, it depends on your perspective, how you look at it. But what I love about your story is I'm almost hearing you say you took this work ethic that was instilled into you, and then you started applying yourself. And as you started seeing the success and the fruit of your labor, it just generated this more confidence. And you mentioned worthiness, right? Like hey, I can become this. I am this. I believe in myself, right? Now the opportunities are endless because you believe in yourself.
People have this weird thing with me, and I don't know what it is about me, but they think I might be arrogant or entitled. I'm the most self-deprecating person on earth. I think I can do anything. Don't get me wrong, because I'll figure it out. But I also have a big struggle with being worthy of things. Like, do I deserve it? Is this what's going to happen to me? I believe the universe, like if something happens to me, it's really good. I'm like, okay, what's going to happen bad now? Because there's got to be a balance here. Like I'm always a person waiting for the next shoe to fall, or the house to collapse, or the hurricane to come. And so I work hard and I'm proud of what I've done because of how it helps other people. But for me as a person, I'm always waiting for this cataclysmic thing to happen, because you just kind of prepare for that. When you, as a kid of an entrepreneur, you know this. In a business, one day you're rich, one day you're poor. Like I kind of grew up with this dichotomy of things. Today we have all kinds of money. Oh, today we have no money for food. So I'm very used to this idea that if you have a good, you're going to definitely have an equal or worse bad soon thereafter. And so I've worked my whole life to stop thinking like that. But I think part of that is preparing. I'm always prepared for, if this all goes to hell in a handbasket, can I survive? And the answer is yes, because I've kind of thought through that process a lot. But I think I'm very much always concerned that, am I deserving of this? Is someone else more deserving of this? Have I worked as hard as I should have worked? Knowing darn good and well I have, because I've worked like a crazy person. But yeah, I struggle with that all the time.
Yeah, but I also think too, and this is something I've learned through I would say even my entrepreneurial journey, which is really a personal development journey. And through the work, we have a leadership academy. I think everything really circles back to leadership, how you lead yourself, you lead your team, you lead your strategy. Ultimately, it all comes back to you. And I think one thing that separates successful women like you from somebody who maybe doesn't achieve that next level or doesn't move as quickly, it's not, and I'm joking about the sleep, but it's really what, from my perspective, what you said about when you're up, you could go back down. But I look at it the other way. When you're down, you know you can get back up. You're feeling down and you're like, this is really shitty. Like, I'm in a bad place. I want to die right now. Or I want to cry and crawl in my bed and eat Twinkies, right? Or whatever you numb yourself with. But I know I'm going to get through this because I've gotten through it. And I think that to me, when I hear you like, yeah, I've been through so many challenges, up and down and up and down. Isn't that life? Like, isn't that the journey that it's never linear? And probably if people who are listening to this, listening and feeling like I'm in a rut or I'm in a bad spot, I would say, and I'm sure you agree, Tiphany, like challenge yourself to think about being in a bad spot almost in a good way. Things are bad, but I know they're going to go up. Can't get any worse from here, right?
Well, we laugh about this. So my CEO, Justin Harper, who runs AR, we laugh about the fact that I'm built for this. Like, I'm built for punishment. I am built to be a whipping post, like a constant punishment for me. It does not affect me. So like the hours, the grueling nature of it, people yelling and screaming at me, like all those things, to your point, I've already been there and done that and survived it. Like, I'm okay with it. It's kind of like the Matrix when Keanu Reeves puts his hand out and like tells the guy to come at him. Like, that's what I feel like. Well, come at me. Like, I'm used to the punishment. It does not hurt me. And to your point, I know that in 10 days from today, this will be a memory. In a year from now, I won't even think about it anymore. But like right now, it might hurt, but I know that that's a very temporary scenario. And what's the worst that can happen? If I'm not dead, I'm still alive, I'll be okay. Like, at the end of the day, that's kind of how my mind works, is unless you put me in the grave, I will come back somehow. It may be swinging, it may be kicking, but I will come back somehow. And so that's kind of where I, as a person, to your point, have kind of always clung to that it's going to figure itself out somehow. It's a matter of how fast can I do it and how good can I do it. Mm-hmm. So I totally agree with you. You just got to keep fighting. Resilience is the word of my year. Resilience is always the key.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. Someone asked me about a competitor recently, like, oh, do you compete or whatever? And I was like, there's no competition for me. I know what my goals are and I know I'm going to accomplish them, because it may take me a little longer or it may go the wrong way, but I'm going to keep going and get there. Right. And I think like that attitude, that's what more women just need to really lean into. It's not, you're on your own path and you get there, but like you expect to get your ass kicked and then get back up and move forward. Right.
You know what's weird about women is we don't do that for each other. Like I have always been friends with men. For some reason, it was just easier for me because men didn't want harm to come to me. They never looked at me and said, I want you to go down. I think women in my career have always looked at me and said, you're a threat and I want you to pay for that. Like they came at me because of some reason, I guess because I'm also a female and I am like the friendliest person. I will do anything for anybody. I come across, if you don't know me, as like some bigger than I am kind of person. Like someone said last year at AimSpa, you're smaller than I thought you'd be. I thought you'd be really big. I'm like, I'm 5'3", 125 pounds. Like, I thought you'd be really giant. I'm like, maybe I seem like that on TV. I don't know.
That's such a nice compliment though, because I think what they're saying, you have a big attitude in a good way and big personality, and you have a lot of confidence. You carry yourself really well. And I agree with you. And I think that's something that's hard for me too. And I mean, I came up through corporate America. So before I started, believe me, I mean, it was rumor central. It was step on her. It was, she did that wrong. It was, don't do that. Because we're just humans. Humans, like the average human being doesn't want other humans to be successful. But what I'm hopeful for with this experience and being able to lean into and get to know people like you on the inside and what made you successful, we're all human beings. We all have challenges. We all do the same things like humans, and we should support each other. We should be here lifting each other up. I use this analogy in our academy that because people would challenge me when I started this academy, like, oh, but doctors are really competitive. They're not going to want to be in a group program or whatever. And I was like, okay, we'll see. And I said, well, when the tide rises, all the boats rise. And it's interesting. Guess who I attract to the academy? People who have that same philosophy. So let's all get better together.
Well, it's interesting. There's a group of women in Chicago, this nursing group. It's like Ronna Kennelly. It's like Brittany Crosdale. There's a whole group of them, like 7 or 8. They did these hilarious videos. Danny Sparkle was one of them. And they all are in the same area with the same potential patient base. And they've become like besties, and they share adverse event help. They share techniques and protocols, and they do fun things on Instagram together. They've learned that the tide, to your point, rises all boats. And so I look at them all the time and say, if we could all be more like the Chicago ladies, it'd be a much more exciting industry to be in because we could help each other. But I think there is a lot of he said, she said, or she said, here in our industry, which is unfortunate. But I think we are at some point, we are turning out of that. I think COVID brought us together in a weird way where we kind of all understood we were in the same boat with the same problems. Grab a paddle, grab a life jacket and go. And so I think COVID was actually a turning point for us to say, we might be able to benefit from each other if we can just stick together and survive this. And so hopefully 2021 and later, we'll have some benefits from the COVID-19 hysteria.
So what are some of the aesthetic trends and things that you're seeing if we're talking about now we've been through COVID and you have a pulse on the industry from such a unique perspective that many of us don't because you work with so many different practices and you analyze their data.
I do.
Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. So what are some of the things you think that we should look forward to from a perspective standpoint as it relates to where the industry is headed in the next year or two?
I think this more complex idea of filler has really taken hold. And I say filler is probably not the right word, but we look at Renuva with fat injections, this analogous fat and growing that back. We look at Quo with deleting fat and cellulite. I think what we're seeing is these biogenetic products are becoming really popular. I think about Sculpture's been around forever. So I think that as an injector, we've always thought about find the hole, put the filler in it, and be done with it. And I say that very laughingly. I know that it's way more artistic and more complex than that. But for the sake of argument, this idea that
anybody who's offended by that, just hang up.
You know what I mean, guys. Yeah. The fact that you can grow back tissue and change the dynamics of your face or of your body. I think that, filler is still this artistic, beautiful thing that we have. But now to say we can change the platform of someone's face or their body with these other products, it's like a boutique or couture thing we haven't been able to do before. Yeah. So I think that's a huge trend going into 2021 and beyond is the idea that we have more products. I think the other trend, which I think is interesting and not really product related, is that we have more entrants. We have now RHA. We've got all the products from Revance around, toxin. We now have Evolus with Jeuveau. We have the same, all these are the same, but now we're seeing to enter the market is much easier. It used to be the barrier to entry was so high. If you weren't Allergan, Galderma, or Merz, you weren't coming in. No chance you could succeed. But now we're seeing all these other industry, players popping up, and they're making it. They're surviving, they're thriving. I think the part of that that's so interesting is now we've decentralized how we talk to injectors between trainings, between DTC, both to the patient coming in asking for it, to the practice with the reps directly. We've kind of built this whole new network or way to communicate with practitioners, conferences as an example, where we don't have to have this massive $1 billion marketing spend. We can actually just get a trainer to go in and talk about the product and you fall in love with it. So I think we're seeing this decentralization or sort of, I don't know what you call it, but I think we're able to grow at a grassroots level now as an industry because we're now talking to each other. There's so much thought leadership and sharing of ideas that we didn't have before. So that's a big trend. And then lastly, I'd say body contouring. People are scared of surgery. I think coming out of COVID, they're even more concerned about things that are health, more invasive. And so I believe that we'll continue to see the body contouring grow. I think we're seeing it even more now with, again, Quo. We're seeing Cabela, full body, some different things. So I think we'll see that continue to become a bigger and bigger option where, at some point, I think we'll never get rid of plastic surgery. Don't get me wrong, but I think we're starting to see more things that used to be only surgical now being done, maybe not as optimal, but in a pretty good way, non-surgically. So I think higher ticket prices for that stuff too, for the practice, which is really great because they have a lot better profit margin when you've got big procedures. So that's a good thing too.
Yeah. And, for you, what is your goal with Aesthetic Next? Talk to me about your relationship. Are you the founder of that? I mean, I obviously know about the conference. So, what is that sort of your paying it forward and building this grassroots decentralization, right? That's sort of what your idea behind it.
Yeah. So Justin Harper, who owns AR and Jubilee, we started it together. So we're kind of co-founders, if you want to call us that. And my whole thing was this: as a Galderma person running Gain, if you belong to a society, if you belong to ASAPS, ASPS, ASDS, any of these societies, you go to these incredible meetings with all these great thought leaders, and you have access to the best in the world. But you have to be a plastic surgeon or a plastic surgery nurse. You've got to be a dermatologist. And so for the average medical spa group who doesn't have a dermatologist on board, they're aesthetic physicians or they're non-core or they're nurse injectors or PAs who have these incredible businesses doing a ton of revenue, big players, they had nowhere to go. And so Aesthetic Next for us was really like a home base for folks who didn't have a place to go. They couldn't get the education. They could come to Aesthetic Next and get the same quality education, the same kinds of content at a price they could afford without having to be part of a society. And so we keep it very focused on the content. We have vendors, of course, we have exhibitors, but when we're in clinical main stage, we protect that time. We think that the CME part of it is super important. We don't do a lot of like vendor presentations and things. We try to keep it really pure. We try to get new faculty every year. We look at the presentations. If you've done it somewhere else before, you can't do it with us. It has to be new and unique and innovative. I've heard the same talk 3 times at one meeting for 3 years in a row. And that's just not the way we want to operate. So if you're going to come to our show, you're going to get your money's worth. And we do. This year, we have 170 sessions. People from all over the world will come to it to speak. And so for us, it was a different experience. I tell you, there's a meeting called Aesthetic Extenders that Christy Lennox does. Very similar. She caters to all the masses as well. So she does a phenomenal job. And we're just kind of doing it in a different way. And so it's in Dallas. We do lots of fun things at night, which is kind of a fun thing for us to do. Josh Davis is coming. He'll do a crazy game night. We have an awards night and different stuff with that. But it's really about offering the same caliber education to people, no matter what their specialty is, no matter what they come from, where they come from. They have access to really great content.
Oh, that is so refreshing to hear. A couple points. I grew up in going to these conferences through over a decade of my time in the industry. I was a vendor for a long time, and now I'm fortunate enough to be a speaker and on the other side of it. But I agree. I think that as we're talking about the barrier to entry into our industry becoming lower and lower, and more practices moving into the space of, look, I have a tight relationship with patients. They're asking me for this. I want to start offering it. And then you've got really your board certified specialties, core specialties that are like step up. There should be a place, I think, rather than isolating or alienating other specialties or types of providers from having access to that type of information. Why don't we just teach them to do it the right way? And I interviewed Lori Robertson on the podcast, and she's so interesting to me because she's all about safety and ethics, and she doesn't care who knows about it or who she offends. But I learned a lot just working with her about how important it is as this industry moves toward certain procedures or services becoming more commoditized to really hone in on education, safety, doing things the right way, period, as a baseline. I love that.
What's interesting, I've become like really good friends with Rod Rourke. As you guys, I'm sure who are listening probably all know, is like the godfather of plastic surgery. He's done everything. We kind of like just became friends over some things we've filmed with him. And he's coming to our meeting and he said, Tiffany, here's the deal. He's like, I'm as core can ever get. But my fear is if I don't teach them, and you don't teach them, who's going to? And if we don't help people to become better, safer, more effective in their injections, when they have a problem, I'm now taking time out of my clinical schedule to go reduce blindness, to fix an occlusion, to fix a bad filler job. It's like, I'm going to have to fix it anyway. I'd rather do it on the front end and help a lot of people to do a lot of things better than on the back end. And now we're in a crisis situation. We're in triage. I'm coming out of surgery. They're calling me and they're panicking. It's like, why would I want to have that situation? I can just give them up front the best way to do it, the safest way to do it, and then everyone benefits. And so like he's, again, is like the most core of the core in the world. He's like, it's just our responsibility because if they have access to get the products and to use them, and they do legally, it's my ethical duty to help them to do it better. And so I live by that all the time. It's like, if I can stop one adverse event with Aesthetic Next, we have more than done our job. If we make no money on it ever, if we never have another person come back ever again, if we've stopped one case of blindness, we have more than fulfilled our promise to our industry. And so that's kind of our guiding factor.
Wow. So you, of all of the things you've accomplished, would you say there's something that you are the most proud of?
It's really tough. I'm not a very prideful person. Like I think about that question and I don't know the answer. What I will tell you is my team for Aesthetic Record, leading people is a very hard thing. And I'm sure you know that, like leading a team is incredibly challenging. Mm-hmm. And to watch my team go from like, when we hired them, they're these like little neophyte babies, and to watch them professionally mature over a year and then start to lead their own people in the team, start to do their own big challenges and big projects and succeed in those, to me is probably the most fulfilling thing I've ever done, because I can control my own actions, right? We all can.
Yep.
But to watch them learn to sort of lead and take charge and be able to impact their life is a really incredible blessing for me. And I've got an awesome team right now that takes a beating every day from customers. And just because that's what you do in customer service. And my goodness, they are resilient and they are rock stars. And so I am most proud of all the things I do in my life. Obviously, my son, don't get me wrong, like Christian's the highlight of my entire life. But professionally, my team is like, they're my superstars.
I love that. That says a lot about you. I really think the sign of a great leader is somebody who can see just extraordinary potential in people who don't even see it in themselves. It's difficult. It's hard. It's something that can be learned, but there's technique and there's a lot of almost psychology behind the way that you enroll other people into a vision that's bigger than all of us, that's bigger than everybody, and get everyone pointed in the right direction for their own reasons. And that's what I love. I think that is something you should be proud of. And that's very admirable, because obviously we can all control our own actions, but to get other people to be like on board, it's not easy.
It's a challenge. You know, I think it's almost like call mom. So Justin and I, because he's CEO, I'm CGO, it's like call mom or call dad. I think this idea that they trust that one of the two of us can fix the problem always, like one of the two of us can save the day, is probably like one of the most incredible feelings I've ever had. Like to know that they trust me enough that if this thing goes south and we're in crisis waters, she'll find a way to give us a life jacket. Like that to me is the most fulfilling idea as a leader. Like that's the thing that tells me that I'm actually leading my team, because they trust that I'll fix their problems. And I know that sounds like a really negative connotation, but that's when you know that people believe in the mission and they believe in the vision, that you can actually get them there. And so I'm really proud of that part of it too.
Well, I think what I hear you saying is that my team is willing to take risks because they're willing to fail, because they know that we'll get through it together. Like that, I think, is too many times you see people that are leaders of businesses or companies who are afraid of watching their people fail. And it limits everybody. It holds everybody back. But when they trust you and you show up as the guiding light and we'll get through it together, that's pretty incredible. So
thank goodness. I mean, thank goodness if we think about Amazon, Apple, you know, thank goodness that wasn't the case at Jeff Bezos' office or, you know, for Steve Jobs. Like if you think about that, if people aren't able to fail, you can never innovate, because if it wasn't hard, it would be easy for everyone to do it. There would be no innovation. So I tell them all the time, fail, but fail forward and fail fast. Like realize it's a bad idea quick, adjust and keep going. You can't like dwell on your own misery when you fail, but you've got to be able to fail and to have some really bad ideas to find that one thing that actually does work. So I don't know, I'm all about like failing to me is equally as important as being successful. Like you've got to fail to be successful.
Yeah, it's interesting. And maybe that's another thing coming out of COVID, because I'm seeing so many more women starting businesses now, like just at crazy pace. And it's like, I think you sort of, when you have a year like we had, you know, you evaluate like, what the hell do I actually want? And if this is my life, I'm not going to sit and wait around, you know? And so it's neat to see people taking risks. And I agree with you to the innovation piece. That's absolutely where innovation is bred through great leadership. So what's next, Tiphany? So it's sort of like most people would be like, okay, check it, done it. Like, do you have any more on your bucket list, or what's next for you?
I got lots on the bucket list. And I think the next big thing for us, we're launching a podcast, which is coming in the next few weeks. Aesthetic Record is going to keep adding on new features and new things. And so I think this company is going to grow into this massive, I'm hoping, operation with lots of different business units. We just launched this incredibly large e-commerce platform. So we're like an Amazon, if you will, for aesthetics. We have a giant medium production company. So we film all over the country. We film for other companies. We do our own production. So I'd love to see that grow and really become like an agency focused on aesthetics, basically. We can go in and do great video for practices. And, you know, there's a lot of things. We're launching a skincare line in conjunction with a practice, or I am personally launching it with a practice that has nothing to do with Aesthetic Record, that we hope will be a really big, exciting thing too. And so there's always lots of stuff happening for us, but I think as long as we're growing and we're changing and developing, and, you know, I love to see my team go from 15 to 50 in the next 2 years, which I think we can do. It's definitely within the question or the reality of our system, but there's just a lot happening right now. And so to get our system to the place that it does all the things I want it to do and to be as awesome as I think it can be, we have to keep the uphill battle with technology, which, by the way, technology is extraordinarily hard. You want to fail?
Yeah.
Run a technology company because you cannot control a lot of things in technology. But we're at the cusp of like what I think could be some really awesome greatness, if you will. So that's what's next for me, is just surviving all that. And then at some point soon, Kaylee, it'll be, I'll be done with this one and I'll say, you know what? Let's go to the next thing and build the next company. Because at some point I'll grow out of where I'm at as an entrepreneur, sort of in this business, and I'll go to the next big idea. Right. Or we'll spin something off of this that, I'm still involved here, and we'll keep going. So whatever the next challenge is, hopefully I'm ready for it. It can't be any worse than COVID. So it can't be any more chaotic than that.
Tiphany train and just go for the ride. Oh, I know. Survive COVID. You're like, survive COVID. Check that one. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. We'll keep going. But I think this industry is where I'll stay. I love this industry, the people in it, what we do here. I think that we change lives in a way that people don't understand unless they're in it. We make people come out of their shell, live a new life after a divorce, after a death, whatever it is. I get chills thinking about the stories I've heard from patients and the lives that we've changed, as injectors and as practice owners. And it's just such a remarkable place to be that I can't imagine really belonging anywhere else. Like, this is where my heart and my soul lives, is in aesthetics. And so whatever it is I do next will be here.
Aesthetics anyway. So
say that again. I'm sorry.
I said you're doing it all within aesthetics. You've got your fingers and everything.
I will stay here firmly planted in this industry because I can't imagine being anywhere else.
That's awesome. Well, we feel lucky to have you. So I want to ask you, before we wrap up, my signature question for all of my guests is, what does the Fierce Factor mean to you?
I think it's, to use a play on words, is being fearless. It's the idea that you're going to fail. It's going to be very hard. You're going to have to be resilient, but you need to develop this internal strength and this internal compass that you can survive anything, that you just got to work hard, dig deep, and keep going. And so the Fierce Factor to me with anybody is, if I have that sort of that awareness of myself that I can make it through, like, that's my differentiator. That's my thing I can click on and click off. So to be a female, certainly, and to lead with a feminine edge, you have to know that about yourself. You have to know as a female that no matter what comes at you, you can survive it, because it's a hard world for us sometimes as females. But for me, the Fierce Factor is all about you as a person, and just knowing that you can kick ass if you have to and do what you got to do to survive.
I love that. You're so tough. You're tiny but mighty.
When I was a kid, they called me TNT at church camp, tough and tiny, because I was like this little thing in a dynamite package.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what? It's served me well so far. So we'll keep going.
It has. Yes, it has. Well, we could chat forever and ever. I so appreciate you coming on. Maybe someday you can come back and we can continue the conversation and talk about maybe post-COVID. But any final thoughts for our listeners, or anything you'd want to leave with the Fierce Factor podcast, or people that are following you, that words to live by?
I think the idea that you're doing this female edge here, this feminine idea that we should be leading together. If you're listening to this podcast, and if you're not a female, like, help us, get on board with us and help us to lead as females and to really bring that to our industry. But if you are a female, like, this is our time to shine, to come into our own, to step into the light and find our seat at the table and take it. Like, I know I like to take mine. I have no other way but to take it and sit down in it, loud and proud. But don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to take your own, take your place. And I'd love for you to follow me if you'd like to on Instagram. It's at Dr Tiphany Hall. Give me a shout out or a follow, because I like to see what people are doing in their practices and in their lives and their kids, and watching them grow up, and all that is really fun for me on social media. So awesome. I'd love to.
So we'll link it up too in the show notes. And it's Dr Tiphany, Tiphany Hall. And we'll link it up so that they can find you. And then also we'll have this on YouTube as a video if you want to check out the video version of this as well.
Wait, before you go, hey, if you're vibing with this conversation and you want to join me on my mission to help 100 inspiring and intentional women cross the next $1 million milestone in their business this year, or leader, maybe you want to become one of them, head over to Facebook and join our free community, the Fierce Factor Society. Over there, we're taking this conversation to an elevated level. Get access to resource guides, podcast supplements, guideposts, and direct communication with me, my expert team, and of course, a society of fierce women making big moves and disrupting the status quo in aesthetic wellness. You can link directly through the show notes or head to Facebook and search the Fierce Factor Society. See you there, goddess.